All right, so live once again. I had a little bit of technical difficulties. I guess now it's live. I don't know. I can't really tell. Had some technical difficulties with the first one, and looks like I'm back. And for some reason, there's some glitches with the connection, which makes zero sense considering my Wi-Fi speed is quite quick and fast. So what I'm going to do in this live stream is answer questions that I got posted on a few different videos from a viewer, and I'm going to answer his questions in as much detail and as accurately and honestly as I can. And just want to thank James for his comments and for the questions that I'll answer. And then, like I said, if you have topic requests or things that you would like me to go over, cover, answer, or talk more about, feel free to post them in the comments, and I will very likely do it unless it's completely absurd. But anyway, so the questions that he asked were regarding OnlyFans and casual sex and the push that this is female empowerment and liberation. What sex means between people. Are there any spiritual ties or bonds created, or are we just simply mammals? Porn and anything related to this. Particularly interested in your thoughts and on the negative opinions people might have towards women who do OnlyFans or porn in relation to your video on judgment. Your thoughts on Tantra, Kareza, I don't know what that is, and how lovemaking should be. Any history from the East you could share, as you seem to be well read there. Okay, so yeah, I'll definitely cover that piece by piece. There's kind of a lot there, and I think I'll try to be as honest as possible. So, just for background and for context, I'm someone who was very familiar with porn and masturbation, and someone who, for a decent chunk of my life, was very motivated by sex. So I can speak about those things to some degree of familiarity. It's not really how I am now, and not necessarily things that I choose to participate in so much. So the first question is about OnlyFans and casual sex and the push that this is female empowerment or liberation. It seems like there's a few different things in there, and there's a few different questions about OnlyFans. So I'll just start with that. What do I think about OnlyFans? Personally, I don't participate in it. I don't really have any problem with it if that's what people want to do, if that's what consenting adults want to participate in. I'm a bit of a libertarian in that regard, meaning if it's not harming people and it's consenting adults, then cool, do what you want to do. I might not want to participate. I might not think it's a great idea, but whatever, people can do it. So I think it's not anything new for obvious reasons. I mean, men have been paying women like in strip clubs and other things like that for a long time. So it's not necessarily a new thing. However, it's a new version of it that's affecting a lot more people and it's creating a lot more commerce. I think in general, it's a net negative impact, probably on society and culture. I think it's just dividing people more and more. It's people engaged in the exact dynamics that they claim to be against. Like basically exploitation and objectification is now empowering. It's just another way and another great example of how we're living in kind of a 1984 Brave New World where everything's flipped and everything's reversed. Ignorance is truth, and truth are lies, and just mass widespread confusion and just straight up delusion. What I realized is that there are certain people, I would say like myself, who prefer to engage with and try to approximate what the real world actually is as best we possibly can, because that tends to produce better results and tends to be more based in truth, right? But then there's a lot of other people that I've encountered and who engage in OnlyFans and porn and all of these things and casual sex and whatever, where they imagine this ideal kind of scenario wherein all of the consequences and realities of the real world don't exist. And in this fantasy imaginary scenario, they'll be able to do whatever they want without consequence, and they'll be able to get without giving and be able to receive without sacrifice or consequence, and all of these things. And I noticed that that's how a lot of people respond to authentic information is like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but here's a hypothetical fantasy scenario that has nothing to do with real world, and I invented it and it contradicts what you said. And it's like, well, but the real world still exists. So what I think is happening on a larger scale is that more and more people are getting primed to exist in more of a disembodied, disassociated state, which will probably be some dystopian technocracy. I think that's the word. Or be some kind of AR, VR kind of thing. People are going to be on their sex robots and their AI robots, or some basically transhumanist kind of world. I think that's really what what things are trending towards. And how I know that to be true is because people are responding not to the world actually as it is and trying to engage with reality. They're responding to hypothetically in this fantasy imaginary world where things are the wish where I where things are the way that I wish they should be, when there's no consequence, there's no inherent fabric of reality. So it's like that's already their psychology. So when that thing eventually manifests, it's just going to be a perfect lock and key because you're not going to have to deal with any of the moral consequences, let's say, of the world, which tend to kind of be a fabric, or at least I thought they were. I mean, at least I like, for example, I don't live on the first floor. Let's say I lived on the fifth floor. I know that if I drop something off the fifth floor, it will fall. That's an inherent fact of life. I might wish it were different. I might think about how oppressive it is and how I'm being limited and how society and the world and God has created this world that's holding me down from being able to jump off of the 5, 10 story building without becoming injured. But this is kind of the same thought process that people have. And this is why I say this is the same thing applies with OnlyFans and casual sex and all the porn addiction. Is like people are losing touch with actual reality, and they're losing touch with with other people. First and foremost, they're losing touch with that within themselves. Their own inherent conscience and moral compass is gone. So what I mean is you'll have these women who there's tons of videos on it. I don't know a ton about it because I don't participate in that world, but I've seen there's lots of these videos of these women that do OnlyFans, or maybe they used to be porn stars, and then they come out and they realize like, wow, it's really hard for me to find like a good guy. Wow, no one really wants to date me, or they have all these stigmas. And it's like, yeah, they have these stigmas because that's your life. It's kind of like saying, just imagine if Michael Jordan was like, I'm just sick of everyone treating me like a professional athlete. I'm just sick of everyone, when I go out in public, I'm just so tired of everyone looking at me like an object and like a zoo animal. I'm just a regular guy. Why can't you just treat me like a regular person? It's like, bro, if that's what you wanted, maybe you shouldn't have become like the most famous guy on the planet or like any famous person in that position. It's like actions have consequences. If you spend your life doing a certain thing, people will then judge and associate you with that thing. So if that's OnlyFans or getting naked for money or having sex with strangers for money, that's just life. But what happens is all these women who say, I had sex with all these men indiscriminately, but then they get mad when a guy's like, yeah, I don't know, that kind of doesn't really work for me, or maybe I have a different thing. The deeper element that I see is that whether it's like sexual liberation and empowerment or body positivity or OnlyFans, these are just forms of coercion and they're emotional coercion and emotional manipulation. There are ways of people wanting to have their cake and eat it too. And it's ways in which just enacting double standards. It's people enacting the exact behaviors and dynamics in the world that they claim to be against. Because the fact of the matter is, as an example, I've been thinking about this recently, that body positivity doesn't really apply to men. Because I guarantee you, if you go ask like obese women, do you want to date an obese man? Most of them will probably say no. They still want to have a fit, attractive guy. But yet now society tells men that if you don't want to date an obese woman, you're a piece of shit. You're a misogynist. You're a body shame, toxic, whatever. You're not going to go down the street and see a billboard with some fat, really fat dude on it being like, big is beautiful. You're not like, there won't be like, oh, like, because Sports Illustrated, you can see bigger size women on there, but you won't find Jack Black and a bunch of fat dudes on women's magazines being put forth as like, this is beautiful. You're not like, some obese guy is probably not going to win world's sexiest man. I highly doubt it. Although after the last few years, I could be wrong. With all that being said, I don't really discriminate or prejudge people based on their size within obviously reason. I've dated women of all shapes and sizes. That's not my main criteria. Obviously, again, within reason. So, and I think bigger people can still be very attractive. It's not what I'm saying, what in any way, shape, or form. And I think also too, at least personally speaking, even like the really skinny model type women that most guys find attractive, I find them not appealing whatsoever. Like even when I see these OnlyFans girls online or people that have these huge followings, they do not look attractive to me whatsoever the vast majority of the time. Physically, but then also too, if I look at how they talk, how they are as a person, it doesn't, that's not my type. It does not work for me. So then on one hand, of course, you could demonize the person doing it, which this goes back to your other question is, what do I think of people who have negative opinions towards women who do OnlyFans or porn? So what I would say is, of course, you could blame them, but also you can more likely blame the millions of desperate men that are paying them money and giving them attention and giving them validation. If they weren't getting the attention, if they weren't getting the validation, they weren't getting the money, then I don't think they would be doing it. So who's more to blame, the one person over here or the millions of people over here? But again, that gets into a wider conversation. And this is things I've been saying for years about really just how our celebrity culture works and has worked for a long time. It's like people wouldn't do these ridiculous things if they didn't know that millions of people were going to validate them. Same thing with politics. And this is also part of the reason why my opinion of people in society is so low, is that the news is mostly lying to people overtly or through omission the vast majority of the time. Politicians are egregiously deceiving people the vast majority of the time. But the fact of the matter is, a huge chunk of our population is completely on board with that. They just happen to choose one side or over the other, and they don't realize they're being swindled and bamboozled more or less equally by both parties. So then what does that say about them as a person? So on the flip side, what I'm saying is you could blame this girl who's making millions of dollars or whatever from OnlyFans, which it's like, honestly, sometimes you can't blame them. Like if they do it right, they could be set for life. They could make millions of dollars for a few years, save and invest it properly, and be set for life. Sure, they might have consequences, but at the same time, like the thing is, and this relates to the political thing too, and how people will shit on politicians and shit on people in power. Is like, I guarantee you, if most people were in the same position, they would probably do the same thing. Meaning, all these people that are like, oh, OnlyFans, these girls are stupid and they're parasites, which of course might have some truth to it. But on the flip side, like if you were them and you were in that situation, would you do the same thing? Or like you want to shit on politicians or all these people exploiting the world. It's like, if you were in this position of power, of great wealth and influence, and you were pretty much isolated from consequence, now we'll see what your actual morality is. It's easy to make moral judgments and decisions and shit on other people when you have no skin in the game, when you have no risk, when you have no investment. So it's like, I think this is a deeper element that people should probably consider within themselves, or at least for me, that's something that I had to look at in myself is like, well, if I was in that position, would I actually make a different decision based on the conditions that that person find themselves in? And I think the vast majority of people would not. Meaning, if we have millions of people that have already demonstrated that they're completely okay with being lied to and deceived, and then they enact that deception on themselves and they enact it on other people, okay, they're already demonstrating through their behavior and their actions that they are probably not a very integral or intelligent individual. But then they somehow believe that if they were given the position of power and they were given great resources and wealth, that somehow they would do something differently or do a better job than the person that's in there. But it's like your resume says the exact opposite. So what I mean is, and why I mention this is that basically behind all these social ideas and these agendas that people push, whether it's equality or body positivity or different forms of feminism or sexual liberation, usually what people mean is it's my turn to be the dictator. It's my turn to be the tyrant. It's my turn to be the horrible person that I imagine the person that I'm reacting to is. It's kind of again like Andrew Schultz. He's like, these women are fighting to become the men they've always hated. Like sexually promiscuous, immoral, dishonest, taking advantage of people. It's like why do they pick the worst aspects of masculinity, the worst aspects of dysfunctional dynamics? Why not pick honesty, truthfulness, integrity, looking out for other people, protecting and providing, being a leader, being a visionary, trying to live by a code, trying to establish solid parameters and solid boundaries, and actually generate positive things in the world, not just encourage degeneracy, encourage people to have constant instant gratification, encourage them to just get completely consumed by their base desires, which is which is more often than not what these things inevitably turn into. So it's like, why do they cherry pick the buffet of like masculinity and privilege and just take the kind of toxic things or the beneficial things, where it's like, I want the respect and the authority and the power, but I don't want any of the dedication, discipline, focus, determination, or accountability and responsibility that tend to or should come with those things. Which again just goes back to my original thesis of people disconnecting from actual real world, disconnecting from reality and existing in this hyper abstract fantasy world that is somehow cut removed. It's like, again, if I go out and I drop something off of my balcony and it falls and hits the ground because I'm on the 8th floor, I could be like, oh man, life's oppressive. Whoever made this is a patriarchal, oppressive, toxic person. And I can imagine a world where I could jump off this balcony and I'll float and I'll be happy and there'll be no consequences. So I think more and more, this is what these different social agendas that come on as positive and well-meaning are actually just removing people from reality more and more and just taking people down the wrong road. And this is why over the years I've been very critical of so many pop spiritual things, because it's the exact same thing. It's the same dynamics. It takes people down the wrong road, emphasizing the lowest aspects of their character, or just completely putting them off into their fantasy or their emotions or their mental abstractions, which is not useful. It's not teaching them to build actual parameters and solid foundations and specific qualities that it will actually take them in the right direction. So I think porn and OnlyFans and all these social dynamics in this genre is just the same thing. It's just the fact that whoever whoever may or may not be running things just decided at a certain point that sex, gender, and spirituality could be commodified and turned into massive industries, which is, dare I say, exactly what's happened. Like, it just created all these new markets and all these new industries. And I just am baffled that more people don't understand this and don't see this. Um, and just see that's again just another iteration of commerce and stimulating people's base desires, but it's appealing to just a different set of bias and a different set of things. Now, I'm not saying there's not maybe positive things to be found within there. Of course, there has to be something to give it some degree of validity, but that doesn't change the fact that it is inherently exploitative. So that's kind of what I think in a general sense of the OnlyFans casual sex and the push that somehow promiscuous sex and pornography is somehow liberation or empowering. I mean, I guess it can be liberating and empowering in the sense that you can make a lot of money for it, I guess. But then it's also contradictory because the reason why you can make a lot of money for it is probably because you're really attractive, which also kind of just reinforces all of the social beliefs that you claim to be against. Men are so shitty and they objectify women, or they only like certain um, types of attractive women. But then if you look on OnlyFans and the people that are making the women that are making the most money, they tend to fit those exact things. So it's just like, how many layers of confusion can we possibly layer? So that's why I think, yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on it. Next question is, what sex means between people? Are there any spiritual ties and bonds created, or are we just mammals banging each other? I think it's a bit of both. I wouldn't say there's like spiritual ties or bonds that are formed. That's a little bit much. But I mean, even if we forget all of that and we just look at the chemistry that occurs, even if people orgasm together, there's obvious bonding that occurs. I mean, so then if you look at this thing, which maybe you can say it's for bonding, maybe you can say it's just for procreation. I don't know. Maybe the jury's out. Maybe it's all of those things. But let's say there's chemicals that we kind of hypothesize as being bonding. But then you think doing that with a bunch of people that are strangers, or doing it with tons of people across a wide context that usually ends poorly, you think that's going to be positive? Because if we just look at the obvious things that usually casual encounters go poorly, I'm sure there's exceptions, but usually someone gets hurt, at least the vast majority of the time, speaking in general terms, from what I've heard. So if you're doing this thing that, let's just say in a simplistic biochemical way, generates all of these bonding chemicals inside your body, and then that thing that created these things, now it ends poorly, or you never see the person again, or they hurt you in some way. Just look at the math: bonding chemicals, intimacy, vulnerability, negative outcome. Okay. So if we keep doing something that's bonding, intimacy, vulnerability, that leads to a negative outcome, we are really simplistic creatures. So our brain starts to associate bonding, vulnerability, intimacy, connection, whatever, with a negative outcome. Okay, so then you think that's empowering? You think that's liberating? You think that's spiritual? But then what happens is that's what's actually occurring for people in general a lot of the time. But then because the mind kicks in, oh, no, 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 no. No, I'm spiritual. No, I'm doing Tantra. No, I'm progressive. No, I'm poly. No, I'm conscious. No, I'm an evolved person. No, I'm going to work through my shadow and I'm going to do communication. No, you're engaged in a behavior that is creating a problem for you, and the only way the problem will go away is if you stop the behavior. No amount of mental gymnastics will change that biological fact of reality. Like, you really think 20 minutes of psychoanalysis is going to somehow contradict however many years of embedded intelligence there is in the nerve in our nervous system. I mean, maybe it's possible. Maybe someone can pull it off, but statistically speaking, I don't like those odds. And to me, it seems like a way of just making your life a lot more miserable and a lot more difficult than it needs to be. And I can tell you that I'm happy to be proven wrong, but I've yet to encounter anyone engaged in polyamory and open relationships that didn't strike me as really, really miserable or extremely deluded or extremely checked out from their actual experience, where they get this like emptiness in their eyes and this hollowness in their chest that I can look at them and I can see it. But then I can see that there's like the veneer over the top that they have to mask and be like, no, I did a workshop and I learned conscious listening. So now I'm going to sit here and consciously listen to you and not blink because I took a workshop, and I'm going to smile. Yes. And I'm going to nod, and I'm going to talk. I'm going to lower my voice a little bit. Oh, yeah. Oh, So the fact is, if people have to learn all of these mimicry, that means they don't have the thing. If you have to go and learn conscious listening, it means you can't listen. If you have to go and learn conscious communication, it means you don't know how to communicate. And the only way you learn how to communicate is to actually learn how to communicate. So I think people are just ultimately deluding themselves and taking themselves in the opposite direction. And they will pay the price, or they're already paying the price, because I guarantee you they all have a predictable set of health problems. But then what does that do? Oh, well, now I got to take supplements. Now I got to take herbs. Now I got to go to do healers. Now I got to go do plant medicines. Now I have to do all this other nonsense trauma work. Oh, my trauma is now it's past life. Now it's other life. Now it's other incarnation. Now it's ancestral. Now it's species. Now it's planetary. And I'm just holding space. Like, it's all this stuff, but it's like, no, you're just engaged in behaviors that contradict reality, that are causing you to feel horrible. So you have a choice, basically. You can look at reality, or you can choose to just keep basically lying to yourself and lying to everyone else. Those are basically the choices. And I know that might be harsh or mean, but at the end of the day, that's all that's left. It's not that particularly complicated. If you're engaged in behaviors that fundamentally contradict reality and make you feel poorly, that's kind of it. And I don't say that to be mean. I say this as a guy who's done that pretty quite well. Like, I mean, my early 20s, I engaged in many facets of these exact things. And what was the outcome? I felt terrible. I felt worse. I felt like I needed to prop myself up and have all these crutches and handrails and training wheels and things to basically prop up all this terrible behavior. But then I cut out the behavior, and all of a sudden all these problems went away and I felt better, and I didn't really need all this other stuff. I just felt kind of okay normally. And then maybe other problems were like, oh, okay, these are other problems I need to solve now, but at least I could actually approximate the reality of the situation. So again, it just ties back to my original thesis of people breaking from reality, because this is kind of the social trend right now. And if you really get into even spirituality, sorry, it's like someone's fire alarm is going off or something. Um, Even if you really break down what oftentimes people mean by spirituality, and if you listen to their actual descriptions of things, usually it comes down to their emotions. They either feel their emotions calm down, or they feel more detached or disassociated from their emotions and how they feel, or they have an overwhelming sense of connection to something in their imagination, or a substance or a chemical, that then, of course, changes their emotions and makes them feel away from their emotional state. So that's not really spirituality. That's just being emotionally unwell. Like, you might self-justify it in many different ways and have a lot of different ways of, no, 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 it's this. No, 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 it's that. No, 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 I'm doing this. But if people really sit with it and really look at it, that's what it is. The vast majority of the time. Of course, there's exceptions. Of course, whatever. I'm just saying in general, this is what it comes down to. And which is why I've been saying for years, people are really just seeking novelty or seeking to boost themselves up in some way, which again, I'm not knocking. There's nothing wrong with it. Like life is understandably painful for a lot of people. So it would obviously make sense that you want to do something that can give you some relief from that. For sure. No, it's like not knocking that in any way, shape, or form. That's just normal. Okay, so anyways, I need to get back to the questions at hand here. Okay, so what sex means between people? Are there any spiritual ties or bonds, or are we just mammals banging? So getting back to what I was saying about the chemicals and the bonding. So just from that alone, of course, you can see that there can be some lasting imprints or kind of associations. Meaning, if you have this experience, which is like just saying vulnerability, uh, what else did I say? Vulnerability, bonding, and whatever. Vulnerability, bonding is what I was saying, right? This is what it's for. But then you have all these experiences which are negative. So then you start having those associations. That's going to have an impact because you're using basically like massive chemicals to drive this thing into your nervous system, which is inherently kind of what drugs do, and which is kind of really the role of chemistry in general as it relates to your emotions, because your emotions stimulate your chemistry, and then the chemistry makes something seem meaningful or important. And if you have no, it's like, I can give you an example. If you watch a movie or a TV show or you hear a song and you don't feel anything and it doesn't stimulate you at all, you're probably going to say that it's boring, and you probably won't remember it because it won't have an impact. So what I'm trying to get at is that when you have these experiences that are getting mass chemicals going, that obviously will have an impact because it's just driving it into your nervous system. So I think people would be better off forgetting about spiritual bonds and connected to everyone you've ever had sex with and this invisible, like, just forget about your imagination and let's just stick to what you actually experience in your physical body that pretty much all humans experience and have experienced. To me, that seems more reasonable than like, well, I imagine hypothetically that there's these things that connect these people, but I can't see it, but I don't really know about it, but I only think it's true because I feel it through my emotions. But I read it in a book, so I'm just kind of like putting it on a whim. It's like, well, okay, maybe. But let's just say what we can look at is the fact of the matter is these emotional, chemical, strong experiences will shape you. Because if you think about, just as an illustration of my point, if you look at your childhood or you look at a relationship, what will probably stand out are the experiences that were like chemically very strong, meaning emotionally very strong. Those were the things that impacted you. That's the basic definition of trauma, kind of. Because if you look back and you maybe you had an experience in life and you had no real reaction to it, it probably really doesn't affect you. Like, I don't look back on at my childhood and be like, "Yeah, I remember I went to school and everything was fine." That doesn't pop up in my memory. I don't wake up in the middle of the night and be like, "Oh my god, remember that day I went to school and, like, everything was totally fine and I just sat there and maybe I ate a sandwich?" No, what stands out is something that was either really good or really bad, meaning emotionally, chemically stimulating. So point is that left an impact in my system and maybe it still impacts me to this day. So getting back to the question about people having sex, people hooking up, is it spiritual? Is there a bond? Blah, 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 blah. Let's just forget about that stuff and just talk about what we can actually know and look at with our own experience. Because that's really what happens is these chemical sort of things that occur between people that then permanently change how your chemistry functions and your emotional makeup functions. And then you move forward kind of carrying the memory of all of those experiences, typically positive or negative. So I would say that's maybe a more accurate, easy way. To clarify, do I think that's all that occurs? No. Do I think that's all we are as human beings? No. But the fact of the matter is, none of us are really on a spiritual level. Like, we're not connected to spirit. If myself or anyone on this live chat or anyone watching this video was actually genuinely connected to spirit, I guarantee you wouldn't be here. You would have high level, insane uh, cities and psychic abilities. You would be perceiving beyond the causal limitations of this world. Like, you would have perfect health. You would be damn near immortal. um like, you wouldn't be here. So I'm assuming myself, I'm definitely not there. None of us are, I'm assuming. So I think it's just maybe better to just forget about all of the spiritual stuff, since none of us are actually doing anything remotely spiritual based on my personal definitions, because I don't construe the emotions as being spiritual. I construe them as just being the emotions. So those are just my definitions. Feel free to, have your own definitions, or, your own way of going about things, but I'm just answering questions from my opinion. So, getting down to porn and anything related to this, I mean, I think, again, I don't, personally speaking, I don't think it's inherently good or bad. I think it's comes down to the person and their relationship to it. Looking at porn every day, I think that's probably a bit problematic. Occasionally, rarely, sometimes, okay, whatever, cool. Um, but I would say, in a general sense, people are probably better off connecting with other human beings. And if that's problematic, then looking into themselves to figure out why that's difficult, and then figuring out how to actually be able to connect with human beings and have that actually be the thing. Because again, we're talking about, kind of bonding, um, strong chemical things. But then if you're training your system to, like, look at something while you're just hitting yourself, or however you're doing your parts, it's like that's kind of what you're feeding back to your system. So that's maybe not something you want to really drive in. And I think it's getting more and more common that a lot of people have to have sex with each other with porn going, or they have to watch porn while they're having sex with each other, which is just odd. And I can tell you, at least from personal experience, when I would date, I would sometimes meet women who would be like, "Oh yeah, I don't actually feel anything down there. I just have to use this, like massive industrial grade vibrator while we have sex." And I'm like, "Yeah, I think I don't think that's a functional dynamic, and I'm gonna pass." I mean, obviously, I didn't say it that way. I'm just kind of like, "Okay, well, tell me more. Like, how did you arrive here? What's going on? What's your past? What's your history?" Like, obviously, I was being understanding and empathetic and kind, and also trying to see, like, well, is this something we can work through? Is this something that, because everyone maybe has something, no one's perfect, obviously, so it's something we can work through. And then, but I did not realize how common it was, and I just didn't realize the how common it was where I would meet women who just really liked violent porn. Like, that just really confused me. And it really oftentimes wasn't women that you would assume to be, like, kind of perverse or like that. Because I'd also met women that were literally in sex cults that slept with 300-400 people per year, guys and girls. Like, I met people like that. Um, so I just, when I went out and met people, just started really seeing, like, how many women were, like, really into porn and really into violent dark porn, and really had very little sensitivity going on down there. Um, and then some of them would, like, try to proposition me for sex, and I'm like, I mean, I didn't say this, but my thought process was like, nothing about that is appealing. And I'm more so just like, I'm sad. Like, how do we get to this point to where this is normal? But I think, I mean, there's a lot of things at play in that situation, of course. But it's just kind of like, it just drives home that, like, a lot of these women don't really see men as much of anything positive. So what I mean is this woman wants me to kind of just be there and do whatever I do while she's probably thinking about something else and using some tool on herself. And just to me on a human level, I'm like, none of that's appealing. But I know for a lot of guys who are operating in that masturbatory porn kind of mindset, they'll be like, oh, sweet. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm on board with that. But to me, it just makes me like, makes my stomach hurt is the only way I can describe it. And I don't say that to be mean. That's my physiological response. And I say this from like trying because when I first moved to Portland and started really encountering women like this, sometimes I would be like, you know what? Maybe I am just whatever. Maybe I should try to be a little more open minded. And like I swear to you, I tried to kiss some of these women, and it was like my insides were going, and I'm like, this is so weird. This is not even my conscious thought. It's like my stomach hurts. So I'd be like, sorry, I'm just not feeling it. I don't. And then I just kind of ended up being like the girl. I'm like, yeah, I don't like feel a connection. Like, I don't see this going anywhere. I don't feel a connection. I feel like you don't really listen to me when I'm talking. So I don't really feel comfortable to want to sleep with you. And honestly, I know I've talked about my dating experiences and told stories, but I haven't told that one. But I'm telling you, that is the overwhelming experience that I had over the last however many years that I've been here is turning down sex with, I don't even know. I'm not even going to say how many females, but a lot, more than 20 for sure. Um, because of those reasons. Because I'm like, what is even happening here? Like, they don't really listen to what I'm saying. We're not really connected. They're not really here. They're not really present. They're not really even emotionally vulnerable or open. It's just, it feels like some kind of masturbatory transaction, which part of me mentally, especially when I was younger, mentally be like, well, that's cool. Cool. Like, great. I want to get laid. This sounds fun. But then my physiology was just kind of like, nah, I don't, this is not anything remotely appealing. And especially once I started doing Neigong and training more, it basically, um, like, it got worse to where I was kind of like, I can't do this. Um, but then basically the thing is I say these things to women. I explain like, yeah, I feel like we're not really connected. You're not really open. We're not really conversing. You don't really listen. There's no real anything here. It's just some kind of masturbatory thing. And then they look at me like I'm the idiot. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wait, did they just become the guys that they were against? I thought they were against all of this stuff, objectification, using people, not seeing them as people, not seeing their, uniqueness or their emotion or taking the time to get to know them and just using them for, a thing. And I was like, wait, I thought that's what they were against. Huh. But then that's what they're doing. But then I'm weird when I say, I don't know, it doesn't work for me. Um, So yeah, that's been a lot of experience. And just saying, someone said you're gonna have so many dudes moving to Portland. Yeah, honestly, I mean, if you just want to get laid, the West Coast is great, man. The women are just, well, I guess within reason. You have to be at least moderately decently looking. I think I'm pretty average, personally speaking. And I'm kind of a dick. So but I can be very nice. I can be very polite. I can be very conversational, engage people. Um, so there's that as well. But at the same time, if you basically dress decently well, shower, be clean, be groomed, have a decent job, live by yourself, basically just have most of the facets of being a normal adult male, and automatically you're going to get a lot of women that will probably try to bang you, and you're going to get a lot of desperate women that will just try to flock to you because they're like, oh my god, there's like kind of a decent, normal guy. But then you realize they're just flocking to you because of their insecurity and desperation. They don't actually give a shit about who you are as a person, which is all equally kind of dehumanizing and a little bit a little bit of a bummer, a little bit disheartening to say the least. But yeah, you just like the bare minimum. And then yeah, maybe like be good at conversation slightly and engage people on a human level. But I don't know. I mean, it's a quagmire. It's a fucking minefield because it just depends on what mood they're in. It depends on, you know, whether they're looking for the guy that's going to be smart and engage them conversationally, or looking for the guy that's just going to be funny, or the guy that's going to be direct. And if you mismatch your approach, then whatever. But that's just life. So that's what I would say about ties between people and porn. I think it's just really conditioning people in the wrong way, men and women. I know porn used to be stereotypically a male thing, but from what I've seen in my anecdotal thing, and even according to Pornhub statistics, lots of women are on there as well. And a lot of them have just become the men that they claim to be against. Let's see, next question. Particularly interested in your thoughts of the negative opinions people might have towards women who do OnlyFans or porn. I think I answered that already in some detail. Your thoughts on Tantra Kareza? I don't know what that is, I don't think, and how lovemaking should be. Okay, let me Google what Kareza is. Type of gentle, affectionate intercourse. I mean, the thing is, like, how to try this spiritual. Dude, it's not spiritual. Like, I don't get why people have to try to make everything spiritual, man. Like, it's really, I mean, it's just branding at this point. Oh, it's spiritual. Oh, okay, I'm in. Um, so the fact is, like, okay, what's the question? Before I go off on too many changes, what are my thoughts on it, how lovemaking should be? Honestly, I think how it should be is what works for the two people. That's it. Like I said, two consenting adults that decide what works for them. That's what I think. And it's going to vary, depending on people's moods, depending on their emotional state, depending on their past, depending on their personalities, depending on so many different things. So that's really up to individuals to decide for themselves. Because ultimately, I would say in an ideal world, in an ideal sense, sex, I think I talked about this in another video. Sex should be something that really has a strong effect upon the heart. And I don't mean like energy moving up and anything. Calm down, guys. Like, it's not anything crazy. It's just more so what I was saying earlier about the emotional things, because a lot of what underlies sexual dynamics is fear and power. Which, if that sounds weird to people, look at all the weird sex stuff that people do, which you would think stimulates fear or is based in some power dynamic, someone having power over someone else, whether it's guys wanting to dominate women or women wanting to be dominated, or vice versa. You can understand the principle based on those extremes. So that's really what underlies a lot of what drives people. And actually, the less fear you have in your system, the less distorted relationship you have to power dynamics. Actually, sex becomes pretty uninteresting and kind of boring. Like, it's about as interesting as taking a shit. I mean, obviously there's a little more to it if you have a strong emotional connection, but I'm just saying in terms of like how dominant it is in your psyche. Whereas for a lot of people, it's like a dominant thing that's always kind of just there. And I can say from personal experience, definitely a lot earlier in my life, it was just always like angel over here, devil over here, angel over here. Just like, hey, what about this? What about that? Look at this girl. Look at that girl. What about porn? What about sex? Just always thinking about it. Maybe part of that is also like being a younger man. But I see a lot of people still living in that way, women as well. And personally, like, I think it's a really uncomfortable way to live. I'm glad I don't feel that way anymore. Like, I can tell you that. It's much more peaceful and calm on the other side of it. Um, but basically, why I mentioned is the fear dynamic. So fear is like fear of loss of sense of self, and then the whole thing about procreation, that whole drive, which I won't really try to expand and break down this whole thing. But obviously, if sex is procreation, then like fear would obviously have to be a part of that, because everyone's ultimately the fear of death is one of the biggest things that drives us, and more so the fear of loss of sense of self and identity. And actually, that's, I hate to say it, but for a lot of people, that's why they have kids. Not because of particularly anything altruistic. I mean, it can turn into that, obviously, but ultimately, for a lot of people, it's just a selfish aim, which I don't think there's anything wrong of. I'm not knocking it. I'm just saying, if we look at sometimes people's real motivations, sometimes it's just like wanting to maintain their sense of self and their identity, which even just look at people wanting to maintain their family bloodline and their name. That's part of it. It's kind of all tied up in that similar dynamic. So my point is, if people actually calm down and have less fear in their system and are less, have a healthier relationship to power dynamics, actually their sex drive will go down and their overall interest in it will go down, and the overall impact it has will diminish. So if we're trying to say that somehow people doing sex stuff is spiritual, by definition, it isn't, because they're going in the opposite direction. I don't think there's ever, well, I mean, now in modern times, but if we just look at actual legitimate traditions, they were never like, you know what, be as distorted and have as much power hungry craziness as you can, be as emotionally volatile as possible, take all of your lowest desires and do them as much as possible. Tends Religions and spiritual things tend to be the opposite of like, hey, maybe like let's try to step away from these things if you can. Because if we're trying to lead you towards something higher, union with something higher, union with a higher, more developed part of yourself, not even self, but something beyond self, I should say, then here's the direction. So then people are saying, I'm going to do something high minded and spiritual, but I'm going to do it by going in the exact opposite direction and strengthening all of the opposite characteristics, all of the opposite qualities, all of the opposite criterias. Again, people breaking from reality, people wanting to have their cake and eat it too, people wanting to exist in these obscure fantasy worlds that have nothing to do with real life. It has nothing to do with reality. It's just another example of it. And it all ties in because a lot of people that do spirituality stuff also get wound up in a lot of sex stuff and try to like spiritualize sex and whatever. It's like, from what the way I've heard it explained is, people are more likely to take whatever's higher and pollute it and bring it down lower than they are to take anything lower and make it higher. Not that that's actually how it works or what actually occurs, but that's how I've heard it explained. And that to me just makes the absolute most sense. Like, for example, I wouldn't go scream at people. Like, if I said to you guys, okay, guys, here's how to be calm and have a peaceful life. And I said, every time you leave your door, just get in everyone's face and yell at them and insult them and be and like say the meanest things you can to them. And that's how you'll create a peaceful life. I mean, actually, it might create a peaceful life because it'll probably get you killed or beat up and or get you thrown in jail. So like that might give you some peace, but that'd be like not really the peace you want. So it's saying is like the exact opposite thing is going to achieve this. That's not, no. How to be a billionaire, spend all of your money and overdraft all of your bank accounts, and that will make you rich. That's not real. How to live forever, drive your car off a cliff. Like, like no, but this is the same kind of logic that is coming into a lot of these arguments. Um, so what was my point? Oh yeah, I was talking about fear and how if you actually really diminish fear and your relationship to power, then your sex drive and your relationship to it will pretty much completely change. All I'm basing that on is firstly my personal experience as someone who has definitely been like pretty heavily into porn and sex for a decent chunk of my life. And then secondly, that's what I was taught and told. And if you look at all of the traditions, that's kind of also what they say, is that if you actually develop and cultivate in somewhat of the right direction and do the practices somewhat correctly, then certain changes and things should occur. But what happens is people took that as an instruction. Oh my God, now I shouldn't do sex, or now I shouldn't do this. It's like, well, no. If you're just using your willpower on something, you're gonna lose, because our appetites and our base desires are for sure stronger than our measly little willpower, at least for me, at least for most people. So it's going to take changing actual dynamics, changing actual functioning of the physiology for those real changes to take place. Obviously, yeah, you should use common sense and restraint, and yeah, use willpower to control these things to the best of your extent. But that's probably not going to get people to the finish line. That's also what all of the traditions have been saying as well, the same exact thing. So I'm not being unique in any way, shape, or form. Any examples for what in particular? Because I said a lot of stuff, so I want to make sure when you ask for examples that I know what you're referring to. um, well, I mean, so if you look at the Tao Te Ching, so I'll answer it in a broad way and then a specific way. The Tao Te Ching, for example, talks all about Wu Wei versus Wei versus Wu Wei, which is like force versus no force, or effort versus effort, whatever. It's more so kind of talking about a little bit of this dynamic. And what it's referring to is doing practices and doing certain things that set up the conditions within your system and within your physiology that will lead you in the right direction. Because that's ultimately all a lot of the thing is like right now, if we're just a regular person, those are all the causes and conditions and dynamics we have in ourselves. Those are not the causes and conditions of Taoism, Buddhism, or Hinduism, or yoga, or Tai Chi, or anything. Those are all completely different, specific causes and conditions. But we think we're going to do our just regular, normal life thing, and it's going to be this thing. No, we're just doing our regular thing. So the dynamics that I'm talking about is kind of our relationship to fear and our relationship to power. So when those dynamics change within ourselves through alchemical or meditative means, then those things within our psyche should change as well. And that's kind of the basis of, well, not the basis, but it's a lot of alchemy. And Nadon, for example, is working with specific points and locations in the body, which relate to specific and certain points of our nature, and then applying certain mental qualities and certain numerous conditions within those things to generate changes. That's just sort of what underlies pretty much every religion or tradition will have some form of that, where it's like you do the practice, but also the practice does you, and the fruit of the practice is kind of you. Not you and like my personality, but then the actual functioning of your whatever this is in the world. So anyways, hopefully that makes sense. I know it's kind of vague, but I also don't want to spend 2 hours like going into Nadon and breaking all this stuff down. So anyways, I'm just saying, getting back to fear and power and these kinds of things is, and why I talk about overstimulation is because if people are really engaged in those things and still really overstimulated, they are by definition going in the wrong direction. If they're interested in spirituality, which if you're not trying to do spirituality or any of these things, then none of this shit matters. Like, just live your life, do whatever you want. Like, don't hurt people, be a good person, whatever. But like, don't worry about this stuff. But as soon as people start mixing in this stuff, then now we have to start clarifying terms and separating things and being a little more specific. So getting back to my thoughts on Tantra and Kareza, it's not spiritual in any way, shape, or form. Maybe it's teaching people to have sex in different ways, or to be a little more aware of what they're doing or mindful. But also at the same time, like, if someone's already really mentally wound up and mentally like heavily leaning towards mental, and now you have sex, and now you're going to lean that towards mental. That kind of seems like it defeats the purpose. Because I would have thought the point of sex was to like get out of your head, to get out of trying to control everything, to get out of trying to micromanage. Now we are doing this practice. I thought, at least for me, that would be kind of the appeal of that thing. It's like, oh, it's something separate from all of those things. It's kind of a break. Whereas now people want to make it neurotic, I guess. I guess that's kind of the best way I can describe it. I know it's not the most flattering way, but that's how I tend to look at those things, is people are just trying to make sex very neurotic. Where it's like, okay, you have to do this way and do that way and micromanage this and micromanage that and this angle and that angle and this idea and this philosophy, and try to make it into all these other things, which on one hand I can get. If you want to experiment, you want to try different things, you want to do whatever, cool, whatever. That's variety. Good for you. But my point is that as modern humans, we are already, the vast majority of the time, massively overstimulated, massively mentally biased, already living in abstraction. So you have this thing which is pretty physiological and emotional, but you're going to just try to layer all the other stuff in there and try to make it into something that it just really isn't. So that to me does not sound interesting or appealing, because the fact of the matter is, at least in my experience, if the chemistry and the vibe between the people is good, you don't really have to do anything. It kind of just, at least in my experience, it kind of just takes over, takes care of itself. And the only times in my life where I've found difficulty in sex is when I was in my head. And I think when most people do have difficulty with sex, it's because they're in their head. So how is being more in your head going to be helpful? Whereas, like I said, if you have the chemistry or the dynamics that happen outside of the bedroom, then usually it's usually, at least for me, I think sex is just the outcome of a bunch of other choices and events and conditions and causes. It's the inevitable outcome or the inevitable manifestation or fruit of all these other causes of conditions. So I think maybe sometimes people forget about that, or because people are trying to make everything so conscious and mindful, because they think these are somehow like band-aids or fix-alls, or just put a little bit of mindfulness on it or something. But I think, at least from what I've seen with people, it tends to just complicate it and make it worse, because it's really not that complicated. And what they would probably be better off doing is harmonizing themselves together through just actually communicating and relating as humans. Because the fact of the matter is, at least as I've been told from multiple teachers, all of which were good, that the original Tantra stuff in the original sex manuals in China, as an example, it was literally just like how to structure and organize your marriage and relationship to have harmony. It wasn't even about sex. And maybe, yeah, there were some positions in there, because you would assume in those times people might not, they didn't have TV, they didn't have porn, so they didn't really know what to do. So the book was like, here are positions, here's what to do, because you've probably never done this or seen it and you don't know anything about it, because maybe it was a puritanical time as well. So what happened was, historically, people got rid of all the actual useful parts of it and just took out the positions and took out the instructional stuff, and were like, this is what Tantra is, this is what sex practice is. And it's like, well, no, you left out the 80% that was actually the useful part of it, which is how to structure your relationship and your marriage so that it's harmonious, so that the outcome is good sex and good chemistry, for which the outcome is having good children. Because that's the other part they left out of it, is that they believed that harmonious marriage created harmonious sexual chemistry, and harmonious sexual chemistry and experience created good, strong, healthy children. Which again is the other, which that to them was the most important thing, because carrying on the family line, carrying on the family lineage was the most important thing, because there was a lot less people back then, and you needed to have a lot of kids. For example, if you had a rural or agrarian society, you needed people to work, or you needed, for whatever status, whatever reasons, you needed children, you needed kids. that was the outcome of it. It wasn't like put your dingle at this angle and it's going to be like amazing and things are going to shoot out of your crown chakra. It has nothing to do with it. It was literally just like have a harmonious relationship, and then harmony between people. The outcome is which harmonious sex, and the outcome of that is good, healthy children, and that creates a harmonious family unit, which then a society is based in harmonious family units. So then we build a good society because we have all these harmonious family units, and we have all these children that are ideally, hopefully, born from healthy, harmonious engagements, so then we can have more of a healthy and harmonious society. So that's a lot of the larger dynamics, which to me makes a lot more sense and is way more common sense and way more straightforward than like, I'm going to extend my orgasm and then suck it up my spine and it's going to make me enlightened. And then I'm going to run into the clouds and I'm going to see dragons and blah, blah, like all the other crazy, weird, perverted stuff that people are doing, which has nothing to do with any of it. And that's the original basis of the Tantra and the Chinese like sex manuals that people have then taken out and turned into whatever things, which is mostly just self-justification for their own poor behavior. Because the number one thing people want and have probably always wanted, which is have their cake and eat it too, which has been the underlying theme of this whole thing, is that people like, I feel like if I created a course that said how to make $10 million by doing literally nothing, everyone would buy it because that's what everyone wants. How to lose weight and get what you want by not changing anything. How to lose weight by eating junk food 24/7. Oh my God, this is exactly what I want. It's exactly what I've been looking for. So then people were looking for like ways to justify their bad behavior and make it into something different than what it is, whether it's chronic masturbation or sexual promiscuity or porn obsession, porn addiction, sex obsession. They just look for all these ways to justify it, whether it's, oh, I'm societally progressive, I'm liberated, I'm a strong, empowered, unique person because I have sex with a lot of people, or, oh, I do Tantra because I jerk it and look at the porn, or all these different things. It's just self justification at the end of the day, which I have no problem with. If you want to have sex with a lot of people, cool. If you want to jerk it to porn, cool. If you want to do porn, I don't have any moral issues with any of these things. I'm just saying maybe perhaps wanting to have your cake and eat it too is not the most realistic way to live our lives. And we should realize that perhaps actions do have consequences, even if we hope that they don't or believe that they don't. And I personally believe we are better off if we can look at actions having consequences and then look at what actions have what consequences. Do we like the consequences? What are the things that led to those actions? And what are the things that led to those consequences? That's basically it. That's my thought process. And that's basically the underlying thing of every video I make is literally that. I mean, I've just probably made in my career thousands of the exact same video because it's just that of like, let's try to understand and get closer to approximating what is hopefully true and real in the world to create more efficient and realistic results. That's it. Which that, at least for me, comes from a person who had a quite painful and uncomfortable previous life. So then it's like, well, nothing will make you try to solve a problem like having a lot of pain and then not being presented with useful solutions. And that's pretty much it. But I think what a lot of people are doing is just self-justification. So hopefully that answers the question about Tantra and Kareza and lovemaking and the history of lovemaking. I think I've covered all the questions that were given to me previously. So if you're just tuning in or you're just tuning in late, basically I'm reading from questions that James, I don't remember his last name, submitted as a comment on another video. So if you have requests for things, feel free to leave a comment and I will probably do a video on it or just a live stream depending on what my mood is. Next question. So I'm going to go back and see some of the questions I missed in the live chat. So if you are on the live chat now and you have questions, just put them in and I'll answer them chronologically. Otherwise, I'll probably leave in a few minutes because it's already been an hour and I just answered all the questions that James provided in probably more detail than he was looking for, but that's how it goes. Thoughts about spanking it without porn? Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's inherently bad. It's just, it also depends like where you are in your age. And honestly, the thing is, if you're not actively doing Negong or Nadon, then just don't worry about it. Like, just use common sense, use moderation. Like, don't abuse your body, because the fact of the matter is, the vast majority of people are not doing Negong, they're not doing Nadon, so it doesn't really matter as much, because your system isn't. You have a different system, so like, it's fine. Just use common sense. Don't go overboard. Use moderation. Um, I think that's really the best thing. And then try to actually find a partner and have a good relationship. That's good. That's what I would say. But also, I mean, sometimes for younger men, like, they do have a much stronger thing within them, which is also the caveat people need to realize. Like, this is the problem with so much information being available, is it's not categorized and contextualized. So you have like all these, like, I mean, I've seen it hundreds of times. Dudes that are like 19 or 20 being like, "Oh my God, I just can't. I just have to masturbate and I'm so horny and I look at porn, I do all these things, but I'm trying to be celibate." It's like, bro, you're 19 and 20. You shouldn't be trying to be celibate. Like, live your life, meet people, do things, like do hard labor, work hard, do martial arts, do sports, compete, go out into the world and do things because you're 20 years old. Like, stop reading spirituality advice for old people who are already like tired and burnt out. Like, it's not appropriate. If you're a 20-year-old dude, yeah, stop jerking at the porn and like go out and see the world, but realize like you're a 20-year-old guy, you're in a different phase of your life. I think that's sometimes the problem with things not being contextualized. Why do you consider there not to be spiritual ties? Do you believe you're connected to every partner you ever had? I think I kind of answered that already. Um, because I think a lot of that stuff, again, is just based in people's fantasy and imagination. Because if you remove fantasy, you remove imagination, typically people can't then go to those concepts unless they're actually a spiritual person that I described earlier, which means they're probably not on this live stream, because they would have insane high level cities, psychic abilities. Their body would just be like bursting with chi. They would be perceiving far beyond these trivial realms. So if that's not the case, then we're not a spiritual person. So then we're not doing anything spiritual. So I don't think it's particularly relevant to use those terms. So that's why I tried to explain it in more just common sense, basic ways that we can all relate to as humans in our own real experience. Um, let's see. They justified it to themselves using the reasoning of a child. I am exploring the world. Yeah, we're all beautiful. It's all beautiful connect. Yeah, exactly. It is basically just the rationale of the child, which has been my theme the whole time, is people wanting to have their cake and eat it too, and not really exist in the world as actual adults. Which again, I think I have no problem with. If you just say like, "Look, man, I like to get laid. I like to bang people," then cool, go do it. I have no problem with it. But don't try to act like you're somehow evolved or progressive or high-minded. Like, it's the opposite. Like, it's literally the exact opposite. It's like the lowest, most primal base aspects of your functioning organism, you're somehow saying are somehow higher. And then the justification of it is at the level of a child. That just also doesn't really make sense. Um, let's see. Book list on psychology. I don't. Yeah, I don't really have any, to be honest. Personally, I'm not really a fan of psychology. I think in the pop sense, I think people would be better off just forgetting about it in general, and just living their lives. Sure, if you have a problem you need to solve, then seek out a licensed professional to help you solve it. But in terms of pop psychology and people being like Dr. Google with, all these psychological things, really not a fan. I don't really use that stuff in my own life, and I don't really think it's very useful. I think again, it's oftentimes for a lot of people in a functional sense, just another form of emotional coercion and manipulation, and just a way of shifting the power dynamic. Because now, if you read a bunch of psychology stuff, you have the illusion that now you understand people. So then you go around and start psychoanalyzing. Not you particularly. I'm just saying, as an example, people start doing it, or something you encounter someone you don't like, you hear something you don't like, and then instead of actually engaging with that real thing, it's like, oh, it's their shadow, or oh, they're negative, or they're repressed, or they're have trauma that they need to heal, or you just default to all of these just kind of things that I don't find particularly very useful or functional. Maybe they have some truth to them, and then sometimes it is true, but oftentimes it's just another way of people disconnecting and disassociating, but feeling smart because they can be doctor psychoanalysis for things they probably don't really understand that well. So that's why I'm not really a fan of it, personally speaking, and that's why I don't have any books to recommend, because I don't actually read books, to be honest. I haven't read a book in uh, 6 years, maybe something like that. 2018 maybe was the last time I read a book. Just not really interested in that. I kind of had that phase in my life already. I worked at a library. Um, how do you or do you get people to think sensibly or critically then? Um, well, I mean, for one, I would say the first answer is I'm just speaking from my personal experience, and that's based in my life experience. So I would trust that an individual could make their own decision. Meaning, if what I'm saying is like, yeah, I don't know about that, or your person has their own interest, then follow your interest. If you have an interest, follow it. You have a passion or curiosity, follow it. It's just my opinion. Um, how I think critically is just by thinking critically. No one taught me how to think critically or sensibly. I just sort of figured it out on my own. Or perhaps you can find people that are more intelligent than you and listen to them, and listen to how they think, and listen to how they arrive at conclusions, and then work backwards for yourself. That's what I've done. Because anytime I find someone that's, I think, is intelligent or well spoken, then I will listen to them. Even if I don't agree with them, even if it's a subject I don't really care about, I'll still listen and try to learn and be like, oh, okay, they have skill in this arena. So let me try to understand or listen and see what's going on here. That's just me. I think, again, people have to arrive at their own conclusions. Also, in my 20s, I did work at a library. I did read a lot of books from a huge array of different subject matters. And I think that helped. And then at a certain point, it just became pretty boring, um, and predictable also. So the other thing is, like, I also have made a lot of videos about how to increase intelligence, how to solve problems. Like I feel like I have given people a lot of solutions. Whether or not they can use them or want to use them or want to make them work for themselves, that's fine. I've share what has worked for me. It's basically all I am doing and all I've ever done, so people can make their own decisions based on that. Is society just doomed? Um, yeah, I don't know. Probably depends on what we mean by doomed, but we're definitely have some very bothersome trends right now. Um, so yeah, I'm not super optimistic. So yeah, it's odd because on one hand we live in a time of massive opportunity, and we live in one of the most wealthiest, opulent, safest, most comfortable times with the most amount of opportunity. But it kind of reminds me of the movie Limitless. I don't know if you are familiar with that movie with Bradley Cooper, where they take the drug NZT that, makes him super smart and turns on his brain. So, spoiler alert, what ends up happening is the conclusion is that he's like, yeah, it helps if you're already smart. And to me, I think that was kind of a throwaway line. I don't know if many people really took that as the most meaningful lesson in the movie, but for me, that was the most meaningful part of the movie, because it's like the fact that people have all of these tools, they have all of this access, they have all these resources, they have all this information, but then they don't actually utilize it or take care of it, or they use it to their detriment. That's a reflection on them, because a tool is just a tool. And I can give you an example of, like, even like in internal arts, I see time and time again where people are presented with the a great practice, the right theory, all the support, a great teacher, a great community. If you're given all of the things that you would think person would need, they still don't do anything. They still cling on to whatever their previous nonsense was. And I've watched that in even my own school and classes that I go to over almost a decade. People 10 years ago were asking irrelevant questions that had nothing to do with what was being put forth. It was more so just about their own identity. And then 10 years later, they're still asking those same irrelevant questions. So they had all the opportunities, they had all the resources, they had all the information, all the practices, and they have the life and the time and the money and everything. They have everything that any human could ever want, but for whatever reason, they still didn't really do anything with it. So I think in some ways that's kind of where we are. In the fact of people are choosing to do whatever it is they're choosing to do, that's kind of more so a reflection upon them. And then if you look at a wide scale, so then on the flip side, then people will, have often given me shit for being kind of, let's say, nihilistic or negative or pessimistic or mean or whatever. And I don't know if that's actually true, or if I'm just looking at the harsh reality of what the situation might be. I wish it were different, but it actually might be the case. And I've given examples before, and I'll repeat it. If millions and millions and millions and millions of people, let's say 3/4 of the country or more, is completely okay with being lied to, being deceived, being completely swindled and bamboozled at every turn, if they're just okay with it, what does it say about them? Or they have no idea. That doesn't inspire confidence within me in terms of a commentary on the level of functioning, which I don't blame the individual. I'm not mad at the person what's in any way, shape, or form, because life can be extremely difficult and harsh for a lot of people. A lot of people, it's a struggle, especially now in America after the last few years. A lot of people are just trying to survive. So if you're trying to survive, you don't really have time or energy or care to look at these larger dynamics, which I think maybe is also partially a convenient, coincidental outcome. You'll let come to your own conclusions on that. Um, but I also don't know that it's ever been any different before. The fact of the matter is, I think most humans throughout history have been kind of herd-like creatures, primarily driven by their base desires, of which power institutions have manipulated and guided them throughout history. I think that's just history. I don't think that's good or bad, right or wrong. I think that depends. but I think that's just how we are. But then the fact that why this is a problem is because we were sold a lot of lies in our modern culture. That lie number one, that we're somehow these unique individuals and we have free will, we have free reign, and we have freedom, and we have all these things. We were only told those things because it's kind of makes us better consumers. It creates new markets, it creates new revenue streams for companies. It doesn't mean it's actually true. The opposite's actually true. In some ways, yes, we are very free in the sense that we are the freest serfs and peasants that have ever existed. Absolutely. In terms of the sum of history that at least that I'm aware of at this time, we have a lot more freedom and wealth and resources than any peasants or serfs have had, but we're still serfs and peasants. Okay? We don't actually, a second lie is that we don't actually have free will in the way that we're told that we do. We are subject to so many causal things that we have no awareness of, and we'll probably never have awareness of unless we happen to, become a highly evolved spiritual being that can see into the causal realm and the karmic realms and these other things, which very few people on the planet can actually do. And most of the people that claim to do it absolutely can't. If they can, then they would have like insane, unbelievable cities and like psychic abilities. Like, and I don't mean like I can see the future. I mean like I can set things on fire with my mind, or I can manipulate physical reality with my mind, or I can control people with my mind, or I can shoot fire out of my fucking body, like crazy, wild stuff. Then that would be true, but they can't do it. And they're just usually, unfortunately, I'm not gonna. I'm trying to be nicer, so I'm not gonna go down that rabbit hole and say anything possibly mean or insulting. So, anyways, I don't know what I was talking about now. But yeah, the karmic realm, these causal realms, we're all inheriting this. Even just our family things, we're inheriting things from so many generations of people, and a lot of the stuff we actually can't change. The fact of the matter is, it is what it is. So the idea that we have this like great degree of free will, it's actually just not true. But a lot of these ideas, this is what underlies people's modern approaches to spirituality and self-improvement. And it just doesn't work. And it doesn't work because it just jumping off from the wrong understanding of the world. Because the fact, if you go actually look into and read between the lines in terms of in Buddhist and Taoist and many texts, the way they describe humans is not flattering. Like it's not particularly flattering or pleasant. I think it's accurate, or maybe it's just I'm the only one and everyone else is amazing, because that's kind of how I feel. Whenever if I realize these uncomfortable things about myself or the world, I always feel like I'm the only one. I won't say I always, but whenever I express it to people or try to share it with people, the vast majority of the time, the experience is like I'm the only one. Everyone's like, "What are you talking about?" No, I do good things because I'm actually a good person, or I really am this, virtuous whatever. And I'm like, really, you're not just motivated by X, Y, and Z within yourself, and that's actually what's happening for you. Wow. But anyways, maybe it's just me. I think I just could be a little bit divergent. But anyways, getting back to the point is, I'm just saying, if we look at some of these dynamics in society and look at it, I realize it's harsh. I realize it's uncomfortable. I realize maybe it's not pleasant or positive. And I realize that a lot of people would just choose to ignore it or focus on exclusively the positive. But then at that point, nothing will ever change, because if that's what everyone does, then yeah. So I don't know. I don't have the answers, and I don't really pretend to have the answers. I'm just kind of waffling at this point. Because the other thing too is like history is so much bigger and wider than I think any of us do understand and can understand, probably for obvious reasons. But also, the history we're given in school is usually massively incorrect. Um, and that doesn't take long to find out if you actually listen to people like Graham Hancock or Thomas Sowell or Sowell. I don't know how to pronounce it. Thomas Sowell. These types of scholars, among many others, where you realize like, oh, history is there's really a lot more going on than we really even realize. So it's what I mean. There's all of these layers of inaccuracy that really does people a disservice. And this is the last thing I'll say, which will kind of encapsulate everything I've been saying, because I've just kind of carried the same theme throughout the whole thing, is that, like, let's say you wanted to be good at playing piano, right? Let's say you're gonna attempt to be good at piano through swimming in the ocean, or taking a hot bath, because it feels good, it's relaxing, and in this moment, it's great. But those things don't really have anything to do with each other at all. And I'm sure there's some creative way people could say, like, well, I don't know, if you floating in the ocean will tap you into the flow state and the magnesium will relax you and then that will help your piano. It's like, yeah, but if you don't already know how to play piano and you're not already really good, then the assumption is you're not already really good at it. Because the assumption is if you were already really good at it and competent on it, you wouldn't be actively engaged in these kinds of things. You would be actively engaged in being already competent or good at it. So whether that's trying to do conscious listening or all the like plant journey, medicining, and Tantra, sex, like whatever these different things I've been talking about, basically what people are doing is like, I don't know anything about piano at all. I know it's like a box that makes noise. I at least know that. But I'm going to get really good at it by taking a hot bath every day because it feels really good now and it's really relaxing. So then, but my mindset is, well, if you were going to be good at piano, wouldn't you need to learn a lot about piano? What is it? Where did it come from? Like, okay, there's a history piece. You could understand actually the context of like what it actually is, because you want to understand what is a piano. Well, then you'd kind of want to look at how the idea has changed and evolved throughout history. And then you'd kind of be like, oh, I kind of have an idea for the thing that this is that's kind of changed forms and shape throughout history. Okay, that's an important thing. But also, you'd need all the technical knowledge and all the technical know-how. And you would need a lot of time and energy to just condition your nervous system to effortlessly do these things. So I think this is really my mindset. And this is often why I'm so confused as to why people have sometimes issues with things that I say, whether it's saying like stimulating your base desires is not spiritual. It's literally just stimulating your base desires, right? So it just perfectly encapsulates all the different things that I've been talking about. It's kind of what people are doing. They're saying they want to be good at playing piano, which they have no idea about. They have no real experience with. And they think they're going to accomplish it by like taking a hot bath because it feels good. It's just there's not really a world, at least that I know of, where that makes sense. So yeah, that'll be my closing statement. Hopefully that definitely ties back to my whole hypothesis from the very start, that I just basically broke down over the last 90 minutes. Oh, and it's 11:11 now. What's a coincidence? When I was 35, I wanted to paint. I painted for 20 years all over the country and taught at USF and SUNO. It was hard work and the greatest experience. That's cool. Sounds like you probably know a lot about painting, of which I know nothing, zero. But it's also like, I wouldn't say, hi, in this video, I'm going to teach you about painting. Okay, so today we're going to suck hot water into our anus and spit it out because some ancient yogic text said it was clearing out the crown chakra. And that's how we're going to learn to be painting. But it's like, that's basically what people are doing. If they're like, oh, I'm going to be a better person or be evolved or be spiritual because I'm doing some weird sex thing. It's like, nah, I don't know that really works. Anyways, if you have future questions or requests for videos or subjects, basically leave a comment and I will do it as I just did. Because if you don't know or you haven't tuned in, all the questions in this live stream I was answering from James, who posted a comment previously. So yeah, that's that. Live stream done. Oh, someone said, how would you define stupidity? I don't know. That's difficult to see, or difficult to really dial in, and I'm kind of tired at this point of talking for 90 minutes, so I'll have to save that one for another live stream. What happened to all your other tea on the website? I only see 9. Yeah, I mean, I stopped selling tea a few years ago, and I really dialed back my product offerings a few years ago. So that's why there's so few on the website. Basically, just as a caveat, in the last 3 years, I've basically gotten rinsed financially through inflation, through cost of goods going up, shipping going up, taxes going up, everything. I mean, everything's more expensive for everyone now, no different. But I also haven't raised my prices ever, actually. I think my prices have all been the same since 2010. So 13 years, I haven't raised my prices at all. So my margins just keep shrinking. So just in terms of cash flow, it's kind of really expensive to maintain 15 products. So I'm just really simplifying it to that regard. And yeah, because maybe people don't know this or realize it, but like I live off of my business. It's been my exclusive and sole source of income and sustenance for 13 years. So I don't know if sometimes people realize that or don't realize that, but so I kind of have to actually make some money, even though, to be honest, I haven't really made any profit in quite a long time, to be totally fair, which is cool. I don't have to pay a lot less taxes, but it's just basically, yeah, the last few years been getting squeezed. So I'm not exactly sure what I will do. I have a couple ideas for business things, where I have a few things in place. So depending on how those few things go, I will probably make some pretty drastic changes, personally and professionally, which will probably be surprising to people. But we'll see. It's kind of the direction I want to go, but again, it will be drastic changes and will be a different thing for me. So we'll see. But yeah, gynostemma, I mean, maybe, maybe not, but the owner of that company died a year or so ago. So I've just been trying to figure that out. But yeah, I have some new things in mind, and I'll probably repivot. I may repivot and just redo the whole thing and come out with something totally new. Because like I said, I've been doing tonic herbs and tea and stuff since like 2005. So nearly 20 years. Yeah. Anyways, thanks again for tuning in. I am tired and I'm hungry. So I need to eat and then go train for a few hours and get my day going. So thanks again for tuning in. Again, if you have questions, you can put them in the comments and I will do a video on them, because that's what this was. So anyways, thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for your support, and I'll talk to you soon.